Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
We talk about two fascinating things today. One is science, as one vaccine project steals a march over the rest, at least in the early race for a coronavirus vaccine. And second, equally about a fascinating character who refuses to fade away. And you may have guessed, I'm talking about a general, and it's a general who was often called soldier of the mind, controversial. And I know many of you would have guessed already, that is General Krishnaswamy Sundarji. Today is his birth anniversary, so I will also talk about him a little bit in the passing, especially from my personal experiences and interactions. So first of all, in episode 439 of Cut the Clutter, we had spoken about the various routes to a vaccine and the various projects going on across the world right now in the hunt for a coronavirus vaccine. In America, in China, we had said that human trials had already started. Now, another exciting project has come up at Oxford University. And these professors at Oxford University, the team is led by Professor Adrian Hill, who's worked on vaccines all his life. He heads what is called as Jenner Institute at Oxford University. Jenner, as we know, Edward Jenner, he was the inventor of the smallpox vaccine and one of the greatest inventors, medical inventors in our history. So this is an institute named after him. So Dr. Hill heads that institute, and he's been saying that if all goes well, they'll need a lot of luck, but if all goes well, they might actually give us a vaccine by September. Now that's very counterintuitive because we all know that vaccines usually take 4 to 5 years developing. Not all succeed. And also, even in the case of coronavirus, because so many projects are going on, the WHO's website has now more than 80 candidate vaccines listed. And I'm only saying more than 80 and not a precise number because it keeps changing all the time. How can they promise this so quickly, and how are they so far ahead? In fact, not only are they so far ahead, but they are also signing up with vaccine manufacturers around the world. They've refused to sell exclusive patents to an American company because they don't want anybody making profits from it. And there you also have a significant Indian company, Serum Institute of India from Pune, which is the world's largest vaccine manufacturer. They've signed up, and Serum Institute now says that they are going to manufacture this anyway in anticipation of the vaccine being cleared, because the apprehension is if it gets cleared by September, October, you then start manufacturing. It will take you a long time again to manufacture the doses that are needed, because the entire humankind will need this vaccine. So that production is starting, and that company is taking the risk of going wrong, in the sense that if, God forbid, these vaccine trials fail, then that will be a net loss for them, but they'll deal with it. That's a punt they are taking. Now, why is this vaccine different from others? Why is this project different from others? And why have they gone so far ahead? Why do they have such a head start? Now, there are many interviews that Professor Hill has given. There's also a conversation between Professor Adrian Hill and Adar Poonawalla, the chairman of Serum Institute. In fact, that conversation, the link was shared by Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, who heads Biocon. I will share that link with you in the description. You can hear that. You can also watch and read many other interviews that Professor Hill has been giving. But currently, at this point, we are helped greatly by a detailed story in the New York Times today by a reporter called David Kirkpatrick. So thank you very much, David Kirkpatrick and the New York Times. That report gives us a lot of detail and also declutters a story for us to begin with. I'm also giving you a link to that story. You can read that in detail. Now, the reason this project is ahead of the others is a simple one, that they are not working. What they have come up with is not a new vaccine. It's an old vaccine. This vaccine has been in the works for a long time. Essentially, we had explained to you the various vaccines, as I told you in episode 439, so see that. But one of the modern routes, or the sexy new routes to a vaccine, was taking a similar virus to the one that you are targeting, a similar virus, and then tweaking its genetic material in such a way that, one, it stops being of any harm to you, so you neutralize the virus, And second, to make it mimic the bad guy virus. So when you inject this virus in a person's body, the person's immune system thinks that it is that bad guy virus, and it starts fighting it and creates antibodies without any danger to it. In the course of time, your body will produce antibodies. And then when you are assailed by the bad guy virus, that is the real COVID-19 virus, your body already has the ammunition, the missiles, the torpedoes, whatever you may call it, or the machine gun or the bullets to fight that bad guy virus. So one, you tweak the genetic material so that this virus is of no harm to you. Second, you tweak it so that it mimics the bad guy virus. So that these scientists have been doing now for more than 2 decades with a respiratory virus they found on a chimpanzee. Now we know that apes are close to humans, or humans are close to apes. So this virus they've been working on, initially they thought they will use this virus and tweak it and inject in human bodies to create immunity against malaria. So Professor Hill's lifelong work, he's actually a couple of years younger than me, is in the field of malaria. More than 70 tests have been carried out using the same method for malaria, but hasn't worked. Remember, malaria is essentially different from a viral disease like COVID-19. Malaria is not even a bacterial disease, it's a parasitic disease. So it hasn't worked yet in malaria. Then variants of the same technology with the same virus, the same tweaked virus, were then tried with Ebola, viral disease, and MERS. MERS is the closest you can come to COVID-19 because MERS also is a coronavirus. It is Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. It is very deadly. It's a cousin of COVID-19, but a much deadlier cousin. COVID-19 might give you a mortality rate of 2% or below, whereas MERS gives you a mortality rate of more than 30%. So this virus has also been tweaked in a vaccine for MERS. So both for MERS and Ebola, it has been found to be safe on human beings. That project on MERS was led by a professor called Sarah Gilbert, who also worked with Professor Hill at the same lab. Now, because it has been found safe in many trials with human beings, you don't have to worry so much about human safety trials for this vaccine. So essentially, one long step in the usual process of trial and clearance of a vaccine has already been taken. That's the reason 1,100 people were vaccinated last week in UK. Now, when you vaccine, as you know, some will get plain distilled water, some will get the vaccine. But what you cannot do with the vaccine is to infect them with a virus, because that research ethics do not allow you. You cannot infect human beings in trials with a deadly virus. So none of them will be infected deliberately, but they've been chosen in an area where the virus is spreading. So as Professor Hill tells the New York Times, they are the only team, their research team is the only people in the whole world which wants corona to keep on spreading, because if corona stops spreading, they cannot hold their trials. That's a special problem with vaccine trials. Unlike drug trials, you cannot expose people who offer themselves for trials to infections on your own. But you know what? Like it or not, you can do it with monkeys. So in the US, in the Rocky Mountain lab in Montana, the US National Institute of Health, again the same New York Times report tells us, 6 rhesus monkeys. Rhesus monkeys are the closest to human beings. So we human beings are the closest to rhesus monkeys. They were injected with the Oxford vaccine. After that, they were exposed to the heaviest possible amount of COVID-19 virus. 28 days after that exposure, they are all healthy. They have not got infected. So it's evident that this vaccine protects apes. It should be logical that it will protect human beings as well, but there is no certainty. So this trial of 1,100 has now started. Next month, it's happening at such a fast pace. It's a marathon being run at the pace of a 100-meter sprint, like Carl Lewis. So in June, another 5,000 will be injected. So by June, it becomes a 6,100 patient trial. Once again, because this is an emergency situation and also because the human safety aspect of this vaccine is already proven, the regulatory authorities have bent some rules or cut some corners. The second phase trial that starts next month will become second as well as third phase trial. Second would have been more about safety as yet. First, basic safety. Second, a larger trial for safety. Third, for efficacy. But now they are combining safety and efficacy, which means if the June trial works, then by September you might get approvals and you can start producing the vaccine. So that's the reason this has gone so far ahead. A couple of other interesting things that have happened here. One, that this lab has refused to sell exclusive patent to companies, particularly in the US, who might have wanted it, because Professor Hill says that he doesn't believe that vaccines which are needed by humanity for in a pandemic should be commercialized like that for profit. And second, remember, this lab is named after Edward Jenner, as I told you. And Edward Jenner, many of us have read about him in school, but we've forgotten. But when I was reading this story from the New York Times, I found a link to the institute, to Jenner Institute. So I started reading up Jenner Institute's website, and there I found a link to the life of Edward Jenner. And it's quite a fascinating character, and I think we should know a little bit more about him. Born in 1749, died in 1823, discovered his smallpox vaccine purely out of curiosity. Because remember, in 1790s, when he discovered it, nobody understood infection or germs, and definitely nobody had any idea of what were viruses. There was no way of studying viruses at that point. But he figured in his medical practice that in Gloucestershire, where he lived, women who milked cows, milkmaids in England, or women you might call gopis, they did not get smallpox. And then he put two and two together, that cows get something like smallpox called cowpox, usually on their udders. That's what you pull to milk the cows. And these women would get a little bit of the infection and a few signs of infection on their hands. They'll be out of sorts for a few days and then they'll be okay. So he experimented with one of these women. He took some of this stuff out of one of the pustules on her hands and inserted it under the skin of an 8-year-old boy. He found the 8-year-old boy got the equivalent of cowpox. So postulate 1 proven, which means cowpox from a cow can be used to infect a human being, but it's a mild infection. Then he had to confirm if it also gives you protection from smallpox. So he took some smallpox pus, you might call it, in simple language. We had explained to you in another episode of Cut the Clutter, where we quoted copiously from an article in New Yorker by Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee that told us about a 17th, 18th century practice of variolation, where old hakims or vads or doctors took virus or virus-laden pus out of the pustules from smallpox patients and inserted just a calculated amount of it in a healthy person. So the healthy person got sick for a few days, but then came out of it, but then got immunity against the virus. That was in a way the earliest, crudest form of vaccination. So this Dr. Jenner also used to do that. Now he again carried out variolation with the same 8-year-old kid. And then he discovered that the 8-year-old kid did not get infected. And then one thing led to another. It was only 30 years after he died that Britain made smallpox vaccine compulsory, because initially there was skepticism. There were also religious objections that how can human beings allow material from animal bodies to be injected inside them. So he won that battle. In fact, in 1801, he had said smallpox will be eradicated. In 1980, 180 years later, smallpox was eradicated. Now smallpox virus only exists in 2 places in the world. It is said for medical research, but I think this is a throwback to the Cold War. It is for balance of terror. 1 lab in America and 1 lab in Russia in Siberia. So this lab is named after the man who produced this great vaccine, and that saved them. Humankind, the many generations of it. As I keep telling you that I am of the generation that was protected with this. My parents' generation, a lot of Indians were not protected. In fact, most of them were smallpox survivors. They'd had it in their times. So once again, institution named after a great man, no surprises. It's now doing a great job, and good luck to them, and good luck also to Serum Institute, which has decided to invest its money and make at least 4 crore doses of this vaccine even before it's approved, in the anticipation that this will get approved, and if this doesn't get approved, then take the risk of losing that money. Now, General Sundarji, a lot is known about him. He died very young. He died at 69. If he was around today, he'll be 92. I had the privilege and pleasure of knowing him for a long time. And I'm sharing an article that I wrote on him when he died, a tribute. Please read that. But I will tell you a story about him. A story about him. When I covered Operation Blue Star in 1984, I got one fact wrong. I got most of it right, but I got one fact wrong. I knew that the army had used artillery to fire at the Akal Takht. But what I did not figure was that they had used artillery firing in the flat, straightforward mode, in direct firing mode, not in a trajectory mode as artillery normally fires. Also, I was ignorant maybe, so I didn't understand the difference. So the way I described it in that article in India Today, it was like they had used trajectory artillery from a distance, and then I marveled at the accuracy of the gunners, that in spite of the breeze, etc., how could they be so sure that these will only fall at the Akal Takht and miss all the areas in a crowded city. Now, the fact is that compliment was misplaced, because no trajectory artillery was used. Only straight firing artillery, mountain howitzers were used in a straight firing mode. So General Sundarji always pulled my leg about it. And he always told me, you journalists, you all want to write about defense, but you can't tell the difference between bore and caliber, except you can all be big bores despite having low caliber. But, we became friends. He indulged me a great deal. He started writing a column for us in India Today. And he and I, in fact, when you read that article, you will see the very cute detail of how we came to the name of the article, name of the column. The column was called Brass Tacks, because that was the name of the exercise he had held in 1987, which caused a lot of controversy. But the story I want to tell you is very different. He taught me a lesson that is very relevant today in the times of COVID, when everybody is so scared. This was a lesson on fear and courage. And this happened in 1994, summer of 1994 in Salzburg, at a castle called Schloss Leopoldskron. If you remember, that is where Sound of Music was shot, but that's now a conference venue. So this was one of those track 2 conferences. C. Raja Mohan was there, strategic scholar. Dr. K. Subramaniam, late father of our current foreign minister, he was there, and many other eminent people was there. I just had to be lucky to be in that group. So at night, after we had finished chatting, after an early dinner, Sundarji took us to his room with a bottle of Black Label and said, we have to kill this bottle of Black Label. So as we got down to it, we started talking about fear and courage. And he said, look, all this idea of martial races theory, which country, which nationality is more brave, which religion is more brave, this is all nonsense. It's just the environment. And he gave us an example. He said his regiment, his parent regiment was a Mahar regiment. Same regiment in 47-48 in Poonch area, in the first war of Kashmir. He said one platoon on one hill feature, when assaulted by the raiders, ran away. Everybody just ran away, and suddenly they found no soldiers there. So it was a matter of shame for the regiment and the battalion. The same regiment, the same battalion, another platoon on an adjoining feature. The JCO there decided to fight on. Not just decided to fight on, but he even stood up and charged at the raiders, and raiders came, and raiders were also carrying swords, and beheaded him. And a legend got built. Suddenly word spread that look at our Subedar Sahib, he's fighting even after he's been beheaded. He's firing. No such thing happened. But a legend spread, and that unit stood there, fought, it defeated the raiders. So he said, remember, the same regiment, the same battalion, the same ethnic stock, one platoon ran away at the first whistle, one platoon fought like hell. So the lesson is that fear is very infectious. And remember, just as fear is very infectious, courage is equally infectious. So right now, all of us are living in this great fear. We are dealing with this situation of great fright because of the COVID crisis. So once again, maybe it's time to think of General Sundarji. Remember, fear is infectious, just like the COVID virus. So avoid fear of the virus. At the same time, courage is infectious. Look at all these doctors, look at the police people, look at young reporters in the media who are all working in spite of this fear. So take courage from them, because once again, remember Sundarji's words, fear is infectious, fear is an infectious virus, but equally courage is an infectious good virus.